morning and welcome to CCN News. I'm Melanie.
And I'm Mia.
And today we'll be discussing the effects of violent video games and family background on youth violence. To begin, we will summarize a research article titled The Impact of Degree of Exposure to Violent Video Games, Family Background, and Other Factors on Youth Violence, written by Whitney D. Camp from Western Michigan University and Christopher J. Ferguson from Stetson University. DeCamp and Ferguson outline the arguments from opposing sides of this social debate on the effects of violent video games. To demonstrate the negative effects of video games, politicians such as Senator Joseph Lieberman and Hillary Clinton announced the toxic behaviors invoked by exposure to violence in video games. Politicians claim playing violent video games is to an adolescent's violent behavior what smoking tobacco is to lung cancer. A listing of effects claims made by politicians written by Markey, Males, French, and Markey in 2015 also
Previous literature on youth violence establishes the connection between exposure to violence and violent behaviors. An argument proposed by Whittam in 1989 suggested that even exposure to violence as a witness can lead to violent behavior. Studies that rely on survey-based methods of assessment concluded that there are minimal effect sizes between youth violence and video games. These tend to disappear once factors such as gender, race, and family relationships are controlled. Other studies have shown how competitive playing correlates to violent behaviors. The more amount of time spent playing video games correlates with a small amount of negative effects. Scholars have contributed youth violence to other genetic and environmental factors instead of exposure to media violence. Criminology theory suggests that a strong family bond prevents crime, while a lack of parental control of deviant behavior leads to violent tendencies. Media poses no detrimental increase in criminal behavior since it does not have an immediate impact on the child's environment. Furthermore, brain imaging data proves that exposure to violent video games does not produce the aggression that one might expect. The collection of this data concludes that family environments might influence violent behavior problems.
The study indicated in this article addresses the following research questions. First, does time spent playing video games have a positive correlation with violent behavior? Researchers have found evidence to establish a correlation by using dichotomous indicators for gameplay. Secondly, does the strength of that relationship decrease substantially with the introduction of violent media as a control? Studies have suggested that controls reduce or eliminate effects from video games. The final question, do other social and environmental factors more strongly predict violent behaviors? Criminology argues that familial and close relationships have a strong influence on behavior than media. This study addresses the error in measurements of treating people who play violent video games for a couple hours per year the same as those who do daily by using both a control for underlying propensity. I knew I was going to mess up that propensity towards violent media and a measure for gameplay that taps into the amount of time spent playing violent video games.
The data collected in the study is from the Delaware School Survey, an annual survey of 5th, 8th, and 11th grade students in Delaware's public schools. The 2015 DSS survey showed a large representative sample of 5,133 8th graders, 3,886 11th graders.
Okay.
Although no consensus has been reached about the effect of violent video games on youth violence, this present study expands on the research data from youth which examined the relationship between video games and violence using propensity scores. The conclusion of the data indicates 5 null effects, 1 weak positive effect, 1 moderate positive effect, and 1 moderate negative effect. The models without controls find a positive correlation between games and violent behavior, but models controlling for propensity and other context considerations suggest that those correlations are not authentic. Outcomes were then included in meta-analysis using models controlling only for propensity scores. The meta-analysis revealed that the results were supportive of null/trivial and non-significant effects, and that video game violence has minimal impact on youth violence. As demonstrated by previous research, other predictors such as home environment, relationship with parents, and demographics have a greater impact on displays of violence in youth. Pertaining to this study, it should be taken into account that certain limitations could interfere with the results, such as the honesty of survey participants. Although this study demonstrates limited measure, the effect of dichotomous indicators should be considered when assessing the impact of exposure to violence in video games.
And now on the field we have Emerson, who is collecting public opinion on video games and violence. I'm here with Heather, and we're going to ask her some questions about her opinion on video games and their violence against children. So do you allow your child to play video games unsupervised?
I do.
Okay. And how often do they play? Do you limit screen time at all?
I used to limit screen time. It was an hour a day, but now that he is a senior in high school and 17, I don't limit screen time.
How do you feel about violence in video games, and is it allowed in your household?
It is allowed in my household, unfortunately. I'm not a fan of it, but I do feel like in the video games these days, it's kind of inevitable.
Okay. Have you noticed any negative effects in your child, like regarding them playing violent video games or anything like that?
I'm not sure it's necessarily because they're violent video games, but I do see like major signs of addiction related to gaming. I feel like he definitely behaves much better, nicer, less angry if he's grounded from video games and doesn't play them at all.
Mm-hmm.
But then when he does play the video games, obviously it does affect him, especially in regards to sleep. He could play video games all night and not sleep, and then wake up and go to school and work, and he's just crabby.
So you think it's less of a violence in the video games and more of just a constant want to play and stuff like that?
I think that it's probably both, but I can say with confidence, definitely the wanting to play is a huge issue, but I am certain that the violence is definitely affecting him as well.
Okay. Do you take ratings into consideration when purchasing video games, or is that something you leave up to your son?
I leave that up to him, especially because he doesn't play like on a game console. Everything's on the computer, so he kind of deals with that all on his own.
Okay. And do you have any opinions on like if video game ratings are accurate or anything like that?
I have to say no, because I really don't have any grounds to judge them on.
Okay. Thank you so much. Hi, so today I'm here to interview
Grant.
Okay, and we're going to be talking about video games and the violence with children and stuff like that. So how old are you right now, and when did you first start playing video games?
14, and I probably played my first game around 3 or 4.
Okay, how often would you say you play video games?
Once or twice a week.
Okay, how many hours would you say?
2 to 3.
Okay, and do any of the video games you play have a violent nature?
Yes.
Okay, would you say that there's any correlation between that and like anything in your real life, or would you say it's more separate between like the video game world and?
It is very separate. Yes.
Okay. And what's the last thing I was gonna ask? Do you take into account video game ratings before purchasing them, or the ones you play, or you don't look at those?
Not really, no.
No? Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you to Emerson for conducting that awesome field research. Now we'll move on to discussing a second source.
All right. This article titled Video Games and Children, Violence in Video Games. Also in his finding, Dogan discusses a study done at Indiana University School of Medicine, which researched the relationship between violent media exposure and unusual brain function. In the trial, they tested 2 adolescent groups while they played violent video games using MRIs. They measured brain patterns. One group was normal, while the other had disruptive behavior disorders, also known as DBD. The study showed that there are less activities in the frontal lobes of the brain of those previously diagnosed with DBD, and concluded that exposure to violent media causes change in brain function.
In his conclusion, Dogan states that the government should be responsible for regulating the content of violent video games, and that parents should become aware of the rating system put in place. It has not been perfected, but it serves its purpose by providing a way to differentiate content suitable for a child. By monitoring content and limiting playing time, parents can take precaution against the effects of violent video games on their children. Okay, I'm here with Brayden Lamb, and today we're going to be discussing video games. Is that okay with you?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. So,
I give consent.
okay, good. So my first question is for you to describe your background and experience with video games. Did you grow up playing them?
So I did grow up playing video games. Not as much as most people have, I'd say. My parents weren't too into letting me and my siblings have like technology and stuff like that. But I played a lot of racing games and a lot of Grand Theft Auto when I was a kid. I also work as a software engineer, and I have experience developing video games throughout my high school career. I'm no longer in high school. I actually work professionally as a software engineer now.
Okay, that's awesome. So did your parents monitor the content in the video games that you were playing?
When I was younger, like before like 10 years old, they pretty much didn't care what I played, but they didn't like GTA. They would not let me play Grand Theft Auto.
Okay. Why is that?
Because it's a violent video game.
Violent.
It's pretty well known. But eventually they got over it, and you know, I played a bunch of it when I was a kid, and as I got older.
How do you feel on the stance that introducing violence in video games at a young age can desensitize youth to real world violence?
In my personal experience, I think I'm a little desensitized to violence, both in the real world and I guess like cartoonish violence, or like violence in video games. I don't think video games is the cause of that. I think it's more like gory movies and like horror movies and stuff like that that I watched as a kid, but not really video games.
Okay. Do you feel that your peers have been desensitized to real world violence, like war, school shootings, stuff like that?
I think so. I think pretty much everyone that I've met has, you know, not really been phased like by like a celebrity's like death or something. Like not a lot of people have like that sense of morality.
Do you think limiting like screen time and stuff could help with that, or is that just something that has nothing to do with it at all?
I don't think video games has to do with it, but maybe I'm biased because I played a lot of video games, but I think video games are one of the least graphic forms of media. I think movies and like TV shows and stuff are way more lenient when it comes to like what kind of stuff can be shown to like certain audiences. I think games are still on the more strict spectrum.
Okay. And when producing your own video games, how do you go about, you know, putting violence in there? Is that something you think about, or?
So the video games I've produced haven't really been very graphic or violent. So I guess no, I haven't really thought about violence too much in the games I've made. They've been more like arcade-ish games, like something you'd play on like a school computer. So I don't think violence has been a big like role in the games I've made.
Okay. And do you feel that the rating system put in place for video games is accurate and beneficial? Would you make any changes to it, or is it pretty?
I think the rating system is fine the way it is. I know it's a little weirder in different countries, but in like America, I forgot what it's called. Whatever the agency that does like all of the ratings for video games and stuff. I think it's fine. I don't think parents and like the actual consumers of games really pay attention to like the rating system at all, though. There's no like rules around purchasing games that
Even
are
if
rated
it's
for certain
like,
audiences.
you don't have to be a certain age to buy any video games?
Yeah,
No?
you can. I don't think you have to be a certain age to buy certain video games.
Okay.
It might be like a
warning.
maybe
something.
like I'm sure like certain stores might not let you, but there's no like law around it.
Okay. That's interesting. Well, that was it for my questions, so thank you for answering
Thank
them.
you for interviewing me.
Yeah, of
It was
course. I
awesome.
really appreciate it. I feel like we should handshake now. Nice.
I'm Melanie.
And I'm Mia.
Thanks for watching CCN.
Tune in next time.